The order was only 1 page long, but it carried the force of a lifetime's judgment. King Charles sat beneath the cold morning light, read the final paragraph once more, and placed his signature beneath a decision no brother could ever reverse. Within minutes, Andrew's remaining royal honors were gone. Yet the most devastating blow was not the public announcement. It was the reason Charles had finally stopped protecting him. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The king looked wounded. On the desk lay the order stripping Prince Andrew of every remaining royal honor, ceremonial distinction, honorary appointment, and privilege tied to the crown. A royal honor is an official mark of status granted in the monarch's name. Losing them meant Andrew was no longer restricted. He was being cut away from the institution he believed would shelter him. The decision ended the last official bond between Andrew and royal duty. It also forced Charles to choose between family loyalty and the credibility of his reign. For years, the palace had contained the damage without destroying the brother beneath the scandal. Now the monarch believed protection itself had become dangerous. At Royal Lodge, Andrew took the call from a senior courtier and rejected what he heard. He demanded Charles. He demanded an explanation. When the courtier said the king would not take the call, Andrew's fury vanished. He lowered himself into a chair, stared at the telephone, and asked whether the order had already been signed. The answer was yes. Inside Buckingham Palace, the newly recovered files changed everything. Archivists reorganizing a restricted royal archive, a secured collection available only to authorized palace officials, had found private correspondence, internal memoranda, security notes, and a sealed briefing that had never reached the sovereign's desk. One document carried a stark instruction for the monarch's attention. Charles read that page twice. Then he summoned the Lord Chamberlain, the senior official who oversees formal palace business, and ordered every distinction attached to Andrew's name removed. No delay, no family negotiation, no final appeal. William learned of the decision minutes before the announcement. The prince did not celebrate. He studied the summary, closed it carefully, and asked the question that made the room go still. Has Andrew been told what was inside the final file? And as Andrew demanded answers from behind the closed doors of Royal Lodge, the royal family began confronting a darker question. How much had each of them known, and how much had they chosen not to see? Before they became a king and a disgraced prince, Charles and Andrew were brothers, shaped by the same corridors, the same expectations, and the same impossible family code. Protect the crown, protect one another, and never allow private weakness to become public danger. But now those loyalties had collided. Charles was defending the monarchy from his own brother, while Andrew believed the monarchy had abandoned him when he needed it most. Charles had spent his life carrying the burden of succession. As heir, he had been trained to think beyond affection, while Andrew grew into the freer role of the confident younger son, protected from the full weight of the throne. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution rather than a piece of jewelry, had always demanded more sacrifice from one brother than the other. Andrew saw the lost honors as proof that he was being pushed outside the family he had served. They were not mere ribbons. They were the last official signs that he still belonged within royal life, rather than existing as a problem hidden beyond ceremonial doors. Camilla found Charles alone before the order was signed. He told the queen consort that removing Andrew's final distinctions felt like tearing apart the structure their mother had fought to preserve. She listened, then answered quietly that preserving an old structure could not come at the cost of the monarchy's future. Charles looked down because he knew she was right, and because being right offered no comfort. At Royal Lodge, Andrew stopped before a framed photograph of himself in uniform. He reached toward it, then pulled his hand away when Beatrice entered. His daughter saw the fury in his face, but beneath it, she recognized humiliation. She asked whether the recovered files contained something he had never told the family. Andrew avoided her eyes. He said documents could be twisted when separated from their original context. Beatrice pressed him again, but he repeated the defense instead of answering. That refusal frightened her more than any confession might have done. William reviewed the recovered summary in silence. The prince noticed references to private palace discussions held years earlier, suggesting that warnings had moved through royal offices long before anyone took decisive action. His concern was no longer limited to Andrew. Someone had known. Someone had waited. Then Charles received the message he had feared. Andrew was already traveling toward Windsor and intended to confront him personally, whether the king accepted the meeting or not. By the time Andrew's car turned toward Windsor, the argument was no longer about ribbons, appointments, or ceremonial status. It was about the buried moment that had made Charles's decision unavoidable. Every royal crisis has a moment that later becomes impossible to ignore. A conversation, a warning, a decision quietly made behind a closed door. For Charles, that moment came during a private Windsor briefing 6 months earlier. Andrew had been offered one final opportunity to cooperate with an internal review. What happened inside that room did not immediately become public, but it changed the king's understanding of his brother forever. Pressure had been building long before the final order. Palace advisors were examining old correspondence and access records while preparing to place sensitive archives under direct sovereign oversight. That phrase meant the monarch would control who could see protected royal material, preventing private offices from hiding serious warnings behind outdated rules. The review mattered because missing information could weaken Charles's authority and leave William to inherit dangers created years before his reign. Andrew resisted from the beginning. He argued that earlier restrictions had already punished him and that reopening closed records would drag the family through another public crisis. To him, cooperation looked like surrender. To Charles, refusal looked increasingly like concealment. 6 months earlier, the brothers had sat across from one another during a private Windsor meeting. Charles placed a sealed folder between them and asked Andrew to authorize the correspondence for an internal royal review, a confidential examination conducted inside the household rather than in public. Andrew pushed it back without opening it. "You are asking me to surrender what little dignity I have left." Charles did not raise his voice. He told his brother that dignity could not depend on keeping the sovereign uninformed. Andrew rose sharply, accused the palace of preparing to sacrifice him for William's future, and left before the briefing ended. The king remained seated, staring at the untouched folder, knowing something between them had broken. Months later, an inventory team discovered duplicate copies stored under an outdated classification. The recovered correspondence included a memorandum warning Andrew that certain associations and private communications could cause lasting damage to the monarchy. More disturbing was the proof that he had acknowledged the warning while Charles remained outside the briefing chain. William's name made the discovery more painful. Charles understood that Andrew had viewed the future king not as family, but as the reason the palace might finally stop protecting him from consequence. The final file carried Andrew's handwritten response. Charles copied the page and folded it inside a plain cover before agreeing to the confrontation at Windsor. He no longer needed suspicion. He had Andrew's own words. Andrew arrived believing he could challenge the king's authority, but Charles was waiting with the one page his brother had never expected to see again. The room contained no advisors, no lawyers, and no ceremonial distance. Only two brothers separated by a desk and a decision that had already been made. Andrew entered angry, but Charles did not rise to greet him. The king placed the recovered page between them and waited. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Andrew recognized his own handwriting, and the defiance he had carried into Windsor suddenly began to crack. Charles had cleared the sitting room before his brother arrived. He had ordered every aide to remain outside and not enter unless summoned. This mattered because no official could soften the words now coming. No lawyer could turn betrayal into procedure. Only the king and Andrew would hear what remained between them. "The order is already moving," Charles said. He explained that the withdrawal of honors, the formal removal of distinctions granted in the monarch's name, could not be stopped by family appeals, private promises, or a sudden offer of cooperation. Andrew stared at him, then struck the desk with his palm. "You chose the crown over me." Andrew accused his brother of chasing public approval and offering him as a sacrifice. He said their mother would never have allowed such complete humiliation without hearing his defense. Charles remained still until Andrew invoked Elizabeth again. Then the monarch's restraint broke. "Our mother protected this institution through discipline, not denial," Charles said. He warned Andrew that using the late queen's memory as a shield insulted the burden she had carried for decades. Elizabeth had preserved the monarchy because she understood that love could not erase duty. That truth mattered now, because Charles's reign would lose authority if royal blood remained stronger than accountability. Charles pushed the handwritten response across the desk. The page showed that Andrew had received a direct warning about damaging private contacts, and had answered that his royal position would prevent the matter from reaching the sovereign. Andrew claimed the sentence referred only to routine palace handling, not deliberate concealment. The king pointed to a second line. Andrew had instructed that the warning remain outside the standard briefing channel, the normal route used to place serious information before the monarch. Charles told him this was the real breach. Public pressure had not forced the order. Destroyed trust had made it inevitable. Andrew rose slowly. His anger had returned, but now it carried fear. He warned Charles that other palace figures had helped maintain the silence. Then he asked whether the king was prepared to punish them too. The door closed behind Andrew, but his accusation remained in the room, and Charles now had to discover whether his brother's last defense contained an even more dangerous truth. A king may sign the order, but no decision of this magnitude moves through the monarchy by one hand alone. Behind Charles stood a narrow circle of officials responsible for protecting the crown from legal exposure, institutional paralysis, and family interference. Yet when Andrew suggested that others had helped contain the files, the machinery surrounding the throne became part of the mystery. Suddenly, every signature and missing briefing mattered. Charles entered the restricted conference room, carrying Andrew's handwritten page himself. The king refused to leave it with an aide, because the document had become more than evidence. It was proof that trust inside the royal household had failed. The sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch with final authority over royal appointments, could withdraw distinctions connected to official service. Palace officials still had to issue notices, correct ceremonial records, and inform every affected institution. The Lord Chamberlain, private secretary, archive director, and senior legal advisor waited around the table. The Lord Chamberlain is the senior officer responsible for organizing formal household business and ceremonial administration. Each official had received the same instruction: identify every appointment still linked to Andrew, and remove it without delay. Charles placed the page before them. He told the group the order must remain firm, but it must never become public cruelty. Andrew was losing his official standing, not his right to basic dignity. That difference mattered, because punishment, driven by vengeance, could make the monarchy appear unstable, while hesitation would suggest royal birth remained stronger than accountability. William entered before the wording was approved. The prince read the draft announcement and objected to one phrase that described the removal as a complete royal disgrace. He warned that dramatic language would turn a necessary decision into a performance. Charles listened, because the future king would inherit whatever bitterness this moment created. William wanted clarity, not celebration. He understood that humiliating Andrew beyond the facts might deepen public sympathy for him, and force Beatrice and Eugenie into defending their father. The monarchy needed discipline, but it also needed restraint. The archive director then opened a documented inventory report. 2 former household officials had redirected earlier warnings into a restricted internal category, keeping them outside regular sovereign briefings, the routine reports placed directly before the monarch. One official had acted after receiving instructions from Andrew's private office. The second official had left no written reason. Silence tightened around the table. Charles realized the concealment might have reached closer to the throne than anyone had admitted. A former courtier was summoned that afternoon. When he arrived, he refused to begin before the full group. Instead, he looked toward William and asked to speak with him alone. The honors had been removed in the king's name, but the deeper reckoning was beginning to spread through the palace, and William was about to hear why the truth had remained buried for so long. By afternoon, the consequences were no longer confined to a signed order. Andrew's name began disappearing from ceremonial records, honorary lists, internal directories, and future planning documents. Calls that once would have been answered immediately were redirected. Invitations were withdrawn. Staff members who had spent years navigating his anger now spoke with the guarded calm of people who knew the balance of power had finally changed. Palace officials moved quickly. Andrew's remaining honorary associations received formal notices, while his ceremonial roles vanished from internal reference material. An honorary association is an official link between a royal figure and an organization, usually meant to show public support. Removing those links mattered, because institutions could no longer present him as carrying the crown's approval. Andrew remained the king's brother, but the language around him changed overnight. He was now a private member of the family, not a working representative of the monarchy. That distinction mattered, because family connection could survive in private, while public authority could not any longer. At Royal Lodge, a long-serving aide lifted an embossed ceremonial folder from Andrew's desk. He grabbed it instinctively and demanded an explanation. The aide said the folder was no longer authorized for his use under the king's direct instruction. Andrew held it for several seconds, then slowly released it. The small surrender hurt more than the announcement. Beatrice entered moments later and found her father staring at the empty space. She begged him not to attack Charles publicly. Rage would not restore the honors, she said, and refusing to show remorse was forcing his daughters into a battle they had not created. Andrew looked away, but her words landed. Elsewhere, the former courtier gave William a documented account of why the warnings had been restricted. Senior figures had feared a constitutional crisis, meaning a conflict serious enough to damage the monarchy's ability to function, if Andrew's conduct became tied to wider failures of palace judgment. The courtier then admitted that Charles had been deliberately spared the full briefing while still Prince of Wales. Officials believed informing him would force a confrontation with Queen Elizabeth during a period of family vulnerability. William understood the cruelty of that choice. They had protected the Queen from immediate pain by leaving the future king exposed to a delayed betrayal. William carried the account directly to Charles. The prince did not demand more punishment. He urged his father to meet Andrew again, not as sovereign and subject, but as brothers with nothing left to hide. The first meeting had ended in accusation, but the second would demand something far more difficult than authority: the courage to speak without the protection of the crown. There were no uniforms, no folders, and no officials waiting beyond the door. Charles met Andrew in a small private room at Windsor, where they had once gathered as sons rather than symbols. The king removed the red dispatch box from the table before his brother entered. For the first time since the crisis began, Charles did not speak as sovereign, and Andrew could no longer answer as though royal status might protect him. Charles chose the family sitting room for a reason. An official office would have placed the crown between them, while this room forced both men to face what remained after the honors were gone. The red dispatch box, a secure case used to carry the monarch's official papers, had been removed because no document could repair what had broken. William had urged the meeting but stayed away. The prince believed committees could protect the institution, yet they could not heal two brothers. He wanted neither man hiding behind advisors, titles, or carefully prepared language. Charles spoke first. He admitted that he had delayed the final decision because he feared becoming the brother who completed Andrew's fall. Every earlier restriction had preserved a small hope that Andrew might accept responsibility and prevent the final separation. The king had protected that hope longer than he should have, partly from love and partly from fear. Andrew did not challenge the procedure this time. He said losing the honors felt like being told that every useful year of his life had been erased. His anger softened as he admitted that rage had become easier than facing the pain his choices had caused Beatrice, Eugenie, Charles, and the wider family. Then Andrew gave the confession through a direct private conversation with his brother. He confirmed that he had ordered his office to contain the warning, but insisted panic, not a plan against the crown, had driven him. He believed the matter could be managed quietly, before it reached their mother or Charles. Charles listened without interruption. He said motive could explain the decision, but it could not restore trust. The king offered one remaining path. Andrew must accept the order publicly, abandon every attempt to recover royal standing, and stop pulling Beatrice and Eugenie into a battle they could never win. Andrew lowered his voice. He did not ask for his honors back. He asked whether Charles would still recognize him as a brother after the world had finished condemning him. Charles's answer would remain private, but the next morning, the nation saw its meaning in Andrew's first response to the order. At sunrise, the story dominated Britain. The announcement was no longer a palace matter hidden behind gates. It was printed in black letters, repeated across broadcasts, and debated outside royal residences. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any headline. Andrew left Royal Lodge without insignia, without an official car, and without the defiant expression that had defined the previous day. The reaction split almost immediately. Some commentators praised Charles for drawing a line that should have been drawn years earlier. Others described the decision as the final and most painful consequence of a scandal the family had struggled to contain. That division mattered because the monarchy was no longer defending only its reputation. It was proving whether the same standards could reach someone born inside the royal circle. Buckingham Palace issued a restrained written statement before breakfast. It confirmed that Andrew's remaining honors and honorary royal associations had been withdrawn with immediate effect and that the decision was final. An honorary royal association is an official connection allowing a family member to represent the crown alongside an organization. Removing those links meant no institution could continue presenting Andrew as carrying royal authority. Charles watched the morning coverage without speaking. A broadcaster described the order as the erasure of one of Elizabeth's sons from royal life. The king switched off the television and said quietly, "Accountability is not erasure." He understood the difference, but the words still exposed his pain. Charles had protected the monarchy, yet he had also watched his brother's public identity collapse. Beatrice and Eugenie released no defense of their father. Their silence was deliberate. They remained loyal to Andrew as daughters, but both understood that challenging the king would deepen the damage and turn private grief into open family war. Beatrice stayed near Royal Lodge, while Eugenie communicated with her sister through a private recorded call before agreeing that neither would issue a statement. Outside Buckingham Palace, one newspaper front page rose above the gathering crowd. Its headline read, "The King's Final Line." Beneath it appeared a photograph of Charles leaving Windsor, drawn and unsmiling. The image captured the national mood, judgment without celebration. A leading broadcaster framed the decision as the moment royal birth stopped guaranteeing permanent institutional protection. Hours later, Andrew issued a brief written response accepting the king's order, admitting that his continued disputes had harmed the monarchy, and confirming he would make no attempt to recover the distinctions. With that statement, the public battle ended, and only the final meaning of Charles's decision remained to be understood. The crown had taken back its honors, but it could not take back the years that brought two brothers to this moment. Charles had acted as king because the monarchy required a final boundary. Andrew had accepted the order because resistance could no longer change the truth. What remained was neither victory nor revenge. It was the painful recognition that royal privilege may delay judgment, but it cannot permanently escape consequence. Andrew remained part of the royal family by birth, but every formal connection to royal honor, ceremonial authority, and public service had ended. Ceremonial authority meant the official right to represent the crown during public duties and royal events. Losing it mattered because he could still be loved privately, yet he could no longer speak or stand publicly in the monarchy's name. Charles returned alone to the study where he had signed the order. The king opened a drawer and found an old childhood photograph of himself beside Andrew. He studied it for several seconds, then placed it back without destroying it or setting it on display. That choice carried the truth of his reign. The brother remained, but the protection had ended. At Royal Lodge, Andrew removed the final framed image of himself wearing ceremonial insignia. He handed it to Beatrice for private family storage, rather than throwing it away. His daughter accepted it silently. He understood that the honors belonged to his past, while she understood that preserving a memory did not mean defending the choices that followed it. The recovered files delivered their final verdict through a documented archive report. No single sentence had destroyed Andrew's standing. A pattern had done it. Avoided questions, concealed warnings, and the belief that royal status would always create another escape. That pattern mattered, because it threatened more than one man's reputation. It weakened the trust that allowed the monarchy to survive scrutiny. Charles refused to launch a public purge against former officials. Instead, the monarch ordered a reformed briefing system, so no royal household could withhold serious warnings from the sovereign again. Accountability would replace secrecy, but humiliation would not become policy. Charles had not denied their brotherhood. He denied that brotherhood could excuse broken trust. Andrew lost the symbols of service, the king lost his illusion, and the monarchy survived stronger in discipline, though permanently scarred by the cost. The order closed Andrew's royal chapter with absolute finality, leaving behind one enduring judgment. The crown can forgive human weakness, but it cannot survive when privilege is used to hide the truth. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.